Every time you keep contradicting your behavior, your brain actually takes notes and it concludes that this person isn't a person trustable, like, a trusted personality. So I want you to take an analogy. So consider yourself as a relation with a friend, and you keep making plans, but the other person ditches you, and you slowly start to internalize this thought that this friend of mine isn't really a friend, to be honest, because he keeps canceling on me, but I think that he's somewhere else partying. It's just that he doesn't want to hang out with me, right? It could be the case. So you conclude that this personality couldn't be trusted. Now, think of yourself as a person watching you. Like, I'm a person, my consciousness, I'm, just making plans, but my subconscious is like just this uh kind of a person, behind me, who is trying to observe my consciousness and trying to infer a pattern, right? So if I give it a pattern of laziness, of procrastination, of canceling on myself, I said particularly, because it's basically about self improvement, right? You make a mistake, you learn something, you want to eventually get better, right? I would give my example in this case that I would make an honest confession, to be honest, that I suck at speaking, right? It's not like I do not have any public speaking skills. I've done multiple sessions. It was my hobby and I seriously yap a lot. And that was, just the honest feedback from my friends. But anyways, I suck at speaking on a camera because I do not have that online influencer social skills, right? It's my first time speaking on camera, on, face to face. So that actually makes me nervous in real time, right? So I acknowledge myself and I keep trying to, kind of, I would say, invite betterment to it, because if I keep procrastinating that, okay, I suck at public speaking, but I'm good at everything else. So, I'm just trying to make up for things that I suck and replacing them with things that I'm already good with. But the point is, you do not learn. Your subconsciousness, or my consciousness in this example, infers a pattern that this person or this personality is not reliable because, number one thing, we are going to divide this in a number of sections so that I could make myself clear on what I'm talking about. So, section one is about what actually happens, right? So, this much has been already established that you kind of, your brain is much more capable of observing itself and then developing on those observations. Because if you try to create this distance, obviously not by purpose, because no one would label themselves a liar, right? But if you think that the distance between what you say and what you believe, and the distance between what you would do, your beliefs and your actions, so that distance, that polarity, as much as it increases, the more unreliable of a person you are. And that is something not to be clearly ashamed of, because that is natural. I understand you. But the thing is, when you try to do this again and again, your subconscious gets trained on it. And it would be much more accurate to say that you are not a reliable person for yourselves, even. So, how would you be reliable on other relationships? Because if you procrastinate, if you have this term called incongruence, which is it is basically about, so if it reflects on itself as a personality, day-to-day life, so what's the guarantee that you would not eventually get to a point where you would also betray other persons? You couldn't keep up the promise because you just trying to avoid that inevitable pain, I would say, that would come your way either way if you take action or you not. Because if you take action, you have that pain of, I would say, not regret. That's the opposite side. That would be of, pain of discipline. What would you say, right? And if you do not take action and you live in your comfort zone, if again, speaking of myself only, if I do not try to make 100 videos where I suck at speaking, but I do it anyway to eventually get better, to communicating to you and expressing my point of view fluently, as I do it in the daily life, right? So if I do not get this polarity, much lesser day by day, I'm not having any self-improvement. I'm not progressing. I'm just procrastinating productively. So that's productive procrastination, which we're going to talk about in any other video soon. But the point I'm trying to make is whenever you do not do something, your brain takes notes, right? So you eventually get an kind of a notification that you get on your phone, right? So you would get a notification from your subconscious to the conscious brain that you are not reliable, you're not a trustworthy person. And the second thing, the second section, I would say, I would like to call it the self-betrayal pattern. Now, what is this self-betrayal pattern? Obviously, so one thing, it is kind of a loop, I would say. So it, just like a loop, it goes like in a vicious circle. So the step one is that you make a plan, but in a state of motivation. And it's been evident clearly in the human mankind that whenever they're too much motivated, they become emotional, they make irrational decisions. So you make your uh, impractical goals, and then you achieve it through much more procrastinating way. I would say that, like, there's no other word, right? I do not have any other word right now. So if you have any other word, let me know, but I would just call it procrastination, because you would be motivated in such a way that it could influence you, but for how much time, seriously, like I'm asking you seriously, if you're watching this, that for how much time would you eventually be learning or doing something if you do not have the patience to endure the pain, right? So if you do not have that pain, you cannot achieve something. But since you do not want to get that pain, you will not achieve it. So this is the vicious circle I was talking about. And that's because the self-betrayal comes in, because you try to justify that this incongruence, like the distance between my beliefs and my actions, isn't that much of a problem. I just need to be wherever I am, and that's totally fine. So this was the self-betrayal pattern that I just talked about. And the third thing is, third section, I would like to label it as the internal consequences. So what is the internal consequence? That we internalize that. So you clearly know that this is okay to deal with, incongruence isn't much of a problem at your conscious level, to be noted, but that is a subconscious conflict. And the conflict is basically, you believe something else, you do something else, and it, how we say, it low-key frustrates you. So I couldn't, just label it better by, rather than saying that it's an internal conflict, basically. So that internal conflict subconsciously, kind of demotivates you, like I am a little bit right now, because I think that if I'm explaining my concepts, I have got my conceptual basis and understanding right. But if I am not trying to, communicate at a better level with any of my viewers, so it would create a sense of basically that polarity, that I am explaining this concept and it's right and it's stuff, but I'm not explaining it in the way that you would find attractive or you would understand much easily. So the viewer, which is in this end, would much more, distant and, detached from the reality, because the communicator cannot explain things very much clearly. So that is the internal conflict that could, frustrate me, frustrate you, in your case, whatever it may be. So that is the thing that uh, is the internal consequence, to be, to be straightforward with you. The next section is honestly the brutal truth. It's the end of whatever I could tell you possibly about incongruence. It is that it is not something which happens instantly, right? Because the you remember the pattern inference that we talked about? That is a sum of repeated actions that you take. So if you think that this repeated action, the repeated actions that cause this mistake, I can just, whoop-de-doo, a major fix or just a 24-hour productive routine and it's all gonna fix. It's not gonna happen, because the problem was caused by repeated mistakes. So the problem is going to be fixed by repeated mitigative strategies. And the only mitigative strategy that I could tell you is you do not have to be that much fake. I would say fake because you know that you cannot do something. So do not say it. Because if you say it and you do not do it, that creates internal conflict. Acknowledge your limitations, acknowledge your strengths, work towards your strengths, improve your limitations in, terms of how you can actively engage in any kind of, action or a routine that could help you. For example, if I suck at public speaking, so I would not turn off the camera until I get it right. So this video is gonna go shit. Like, I hope it goes good because of the conceptual basis that I have about incongruence and stuff. But the thing is that if I do not communicate it properly, it's not gonna be, much of a hell of a task. We know that already. So if I get demotivated and I just, sort of turn off the camera and go in the wilderness and just think that, I of no good use and I cannot do it properly, so it's never going to get done. So if I want to do it properly, I better have that consistency to get it done. So the only thing that you read in the thumbnail is say what you do and do what you say, right? So this thing keeps your life simple. And honestly, I understand you. I understand. Like, I also have that incongruent behavior, and many times I thought of training myself multiple times to lose weight, but I, just ended up eating junk food anyway. So that incongruent behavior also created internal conflict that in me. That's basically an internal observation that I'm sharing with you guys. So if it helps, let me know. I would really be happy that if you try to improve yourself. But the only goal is that you never stop. Thank you.